Welcome to the first lecture in a short series on the Norman conquest and Wales. In this lecture we will examine both the physical and political landscape of Wales in 1066 and how William sought to control the Anglo-Welsh border. This will help to answer the question of, how did William defend England against the Welsh? The first section will examine the geographical features of Wales as a country. We will then examine the political landscape of Wales at the dawn of the Norman conquest of 1066. We will then examine William's first method of control, the appointment of marcher lords. Then we will examine why William, or rather the Norman marcher lords, built so many castles in Wales. Before we start, it is worth clearing up a key misconception. William did not fully conquer Wales like he did England. He did not show the same level of interest in subduing Wales, and he did not use extreme methods like he did with the harrying of the north. However, he did firmly establish Norman control on the border to Wales. Later, his sons William Rufus and Henry I would attempt further invasion into Wales. They gained some success in the south, but very little success in the north. It would be another 200 years before Wales was fully placed under English control. Let's begin with a simple map of Wales and England. In 1066, Wales and England were two separate nations, and there had never been any attempt by an English king to conquer the lands of Wales. Instead, most English kings were concerned about keeping the land border between the two nations under control. This is because the boundary between Wales and England was not fixed, the line was blurred, and this meant that bandits and thieves would often undertake raids across the border, in an area known as the Marches. It was a notoriously lawless and dangerous region. The landscape of Wales made it especially difficult to conquer. Vast areas were only sparsely inhabited and uncultivated. These areas were wild and largely unoccupied. There were huge areas of moorland, which were boggy areas with thick vegetation like heather, that were difficult to cross on horseback. There were huge mountain ranges, especially in the north of Wales near Snowdonia, and there was also thick woodland that had very few roads passing through the dense canopy of trees. However, there were some agricultural regions of Wales. These areas provided farmland that provided crops for the local community and carried far greater value than the uncultivated mountain ranges, moors and woodland. This map shows where the main farmland areas could be found. The island of Anglesey to the northwest of Wales was the most fertile area with a thriving farming industry. However, the lowland areas near both the north and south coasts of Wales were also cultivated as farmland. These were the regions of the most value to any king who was looking to conquer Wales. However, the wilderness of mountains, moorland and forest covered the majority of Wales, especially in the centre and the north. These areas had limited economic value to William. As a result of the wild Welsh landscape, banditry was very common. Locals knew how to exploit the landscape as both a place to stage an ambush on unsuspecting travelers and a place to hide from the law. This made it very difficult to bring criminals and rebels to justice. It was also difficult to travel across Wales since it did not have a good road network. This meant you needed a local guide to find your way through the wilderness. However, the Romans had previously conquered Wales and built a road network spanning approximately 160 miles and crosses Wales. This is now called San Helen and crosses from north to south and from east to west. This made it easier to reach the larger towns. Due to the mountain ranges, Wales has a number of deep valleys and fast-flowing rivers. Whilst this made it difficult to build roads, the rivers did provide an established river network, which was important to trade in Wales. The river valleys of the Wye, Usk and Severn were especially important to trade. Finally, Wales had a large coastline, and the coastal waters of North Wales were also used for trade. Let's now examine the political context of Wales in 1066, since it was not unified with England. Instead, Wales was a principality. This means that Wales was divided into a number of regions, and each of these regions were ruled by a prince. These princes had a similar level of power and influence in their region as the Anglo-Saxon earls had in their English earldoms. However, since there was no king, there was frequent conflict between the princes. This meant that Wales was often a fractured nation that remained less developed economically than England. The Welsh princes owed an oath of fealty to the kings of England. This meant that they recognized the English kings as superior in power, wealth, and military might. However, it does not mean they accepted the English kings as their rulers, and no English king had made an attempt to place Wales directly under their control. However, a hero emerged in Wales just before the Norman conquest. His name, which I am almost certainly mispronouncing, was Gruffydd ap Llywelyn, and he was a prince that was powerful enough to conquer the different regions of Wales and unify the country under his rule. This has meant that he has become a legendary hero in Welsh folklore, a symbol of Welsh independence. However, his earthly glory was short-lived, due to the actions of Harold Godwin's son. As the Earl of Wessex, Harold and his closest allies owned land in the marches that bordered Wales. Therefore, in 1063, when Harold was acting as sub-regulus to Edward the Confessor, he conducted a military campaign against Gruffydd ap Llywelyn. The Welsh prince was forced to take shelter in the Snowdonian Mountains, where he was betrayed and murdered. Therefore, when William invaded England in 1066, Wales was in a weakened state. The Welsh princes had returned to fighting one another, and the nation was once again fractured. This made it easier for William to impose control through the introduction of marcher lords. However, what he did was nothing new, since Harold Godwin's son had already established English lords in the marches before his death. Some historians would argue that William was simply replacing Saxon thanes with Norman barons. William's main focus was on securing the marches, in other words the border between England and Wales. This is for three reasons. Firstly, the region had a notorious reputation for raids, banditry and lawlessness. It was like a medieval Wild West, and William did not want that to spill over the border into England. Secondly, he wanted to secure the border against any Welsh prince who might try to form an alliance with displaced Anglo-Saxon earls. Edwin, the Earl of Mercia, attempted to gain support from Wales from 1067 to 69 but was unsuccessful. Thirdly, he wanted tight control of the marches so that traitors could not escape into exile in Wales. To achieve control of the marches, William appointed 3 Norman barons to 3 regions on the border of Wales. These were the Earls of Chester, Shrewsbury and Hereford. Let's now examine each of these Norman lords in turn. The Earl of Chester was based on the border to North Wales. This title was granted to Hugh de Avranches, whose father had provided 60 ships for William's invasion fleet in 1066. The earldom of Shrewsbury sat on the border to Mid Wales. This new earldom and lands were given to Roger of Montgomery, who William had placed in charge of Normandy during his invasion of 1066. To the south, there was the earldom of Hereford. This was given to one of William's most trusted companions, called William Fitzosborne. He was an experienced military commander who had fought by William's side at the Battle of Hastings. The Marcher lords were given considerably more power than the other earls in England. For example, they were exempt from the taxes levied across the rest of England, and the Marcher lords had the right to pass their own laws. Most significantly, they also could build castles without permission from William. This meant that the Marcher lords went on something of a building spree. The Marches became the region with the greatest concentration of castles in Europe. As a result of this, the Marcher lords garnered a tremendous level of power and status. This is shown through the insignia they used. Insignia is a term used to describe the symbols used on their coat of arms, often associated with animals or mythical figures that represent the qualities of the lord and his family. These symbols were then painted onto ceilings, carved into stone walls, and displayed on flags. They became the visual symbol of power and strength. For example, Hugh d'Avranches, the Earl of Chester, became known as Hugh the Wolf. This is because of his iconic insignia of a white wolf on a blue shield. This nickname went alongside Hugh's formidable reputation for fighting with his Welsh neighbours. Let's now examine the impact of the building license that William gave to the trusted Marcher lords. William was known for building castles across England. They would start life as motte and bailey castles, and act as little more than a fortified camp for troops who were looking to subdue a new region. Many motte and bailey castles were abandoned after their initial use, while others were knocked down and replaced with stone structures. These then became the permanent reminder of Norman conquest in a region. The Marcher lords built their largest castles in major towns on the border to Wales. They became like mini palaces, as much a symbol of the lord's power as the Norman conquest. After a while, however, the Marcher lords began to build other smaller fortifications in the Marcher region, so to strengthen the border. This is a diagram to show a network of castles created by the Earl of Hereford. His territory stretched from Chepstow in the south to Ludlow to the north. This chain of castles was able to fortify the Anglo-Welsh border, making it very difficult for border raids to take place and for English rebels to escape into exile. Then, across the 11th century, further castles were built, going further inland and across the coastline of Wales. This map shows how William also placed castles elsewhere in England. They were not unique to the Welsh Marches. William liked to build castles on the coast, as defense against the Vikings, and on riverbanks, in order to control the trade that was passing through English towns. Over the course of the 11th century, more castles were built across England, in every town and many villages. However, nowhere else would you see such a dense concentration of castles as you would in the Welsh Marches. Let's now have a look at the structure of two different types of castle, so to understand how they were used as both defense and as a status symbol. Firstly, the Motte and Bailey Castle was designed as a temporary fort. It was made out of timber and earth, both of which were easily available across England. The keep would always be built on the top of a motte, which was the large mound of earth. This meant that it was easy for guards to see any attacking army. It was also the safest area of the castle. Try to remember the keep as the place to keep everyone safe. The bailey was the area where the soldiers were garrisoned as the castle developed over time. This also became the living quarters for the families that worked in the castle. The entire structure was made of wood. This included the palisade, which was a large fence made up of sharpened wooden stakes, which normally stood beside a steep ditch. This simple measure made it very difficult for the invading army to get inside. Finally, you would have a drawbridge, which could be lowered in times of peace, but lifted when the castle and its occupants were placed under threat. Once the castle had met its original purpose as a base for an invading army, it was often demolished. It was at this point that the new Norman lord would rebuild the castle in stone. This served the immediate purpose of being a symbol of Norman power to the native population. However, it also became the center for the administration of local government and a trading hub, since many were built adjacent to a river or old Roman road. Let's examine Chepstow Castle as an example. This sat on the north bank of a large estuary, which acted as a natural border between England and Wales, directly across from Bristol. This is a modern-day photograph of the castle. The first Chepstow Castle was built by William Fitzosborne, the Earl of Hereford, in 1067. It was positioned near a crossing on the River Wye and was originally made with the purpose of defending the English county of Gloucestershire from the Welsh. There is no evidence of a major settlement in Chepstow before the Norman conquest. However, over time, the castle became a trading hub for South Wales and West England, therefore a town grew up around the castle during the Norman period. It is worth noting that this large rounded tower was built later in the medieval age and would not have been there during the Norman conquest. Instead, let's focus on this key section, which formed part of the original Great Tower of Chepstow Castle. The Great Tower was essentially a stone keep. It acted as a fort against enemies, both Welsh and Anglo-Saxon. However, inside the tower, there would have been a great hall. This would have been used by William Fitzosborne, the Earl of Hereford, in order to entertain important guests. It was also used to administer writs or laws, and as a court to administer justice. This meant it became the center of power in the region. It was also a place where the marcher lord could showcase their emblems and insignia, so to showcase how they were in charge. Let's return to our overarching question of how did William defend England against the Welsh? Firstly, it is worth noting that Wales was a sparsely populated nation with dense woodland, wild moorlands and large mountain ranges. This meant it was difficult to conquer and had limited economic value to William. Secondly, it is worth remembering that Wales was its own nation, divided into princedoms. Each princedom had its own prince and they would often fight amongst themselves. During the mid-11th century, a prince called Gruffydd ap Llywelyn had united all of Wales under his rule, but he had been killed in 1063. This had left a power vacuum and no clear leadership in Wales. William was most interested in imposing Norman control on the border to Wales, known as the Marches. Therefore, he appointed 3 of his most trusted followers as earls along the Anglo-Welsh border, who had special privileges to build castles and make their own laws. This meant the Normans firmly established control of the Marches. As a result of these special privileges, the Marcher lords became very powerful and built many castles in the region. Despite this, they were unable to conquer the whole of Wales during the Norman period, as the Welsh princes had the home advantage of knowing how to use the Welsh landscape to engage in guerrilla-style warfare, something we will discuss in more detail during the next lecture. Thank you for watching. Tune into the next lecture to examine key events and rebellions that help to explain why the Normans were never able to fully conquer Wales.